Certainly the biggest threat is with on-site media here in the US, which is such a huge portion of the business and a huge portion of the profit that these retail media businesses drive. If research and inspiration and discovery and sometimes even the transaction itself start happening off of another property, that takes that impression, that click, that experience off of a retailer's site, out of its app.
Welcome to Unlocking Retail Media, the podcast where we explore the evolving world of retail media from data strategy to monetization and everything in between. This is where we break down how retailers can build smarter, data-driven media networks by aligning with what brands truly need, from scalable ad solutions and meaningful metrics to cross-channel attribution and programmatic strategy. Welcome to Unlocking Retail Media. If you've been following the podcast, we've had a lot of conversations about where retail media is going. My guest today, Michael Schuh, is someone who's actually helped build where it is today. He's one of the leaders who's basically grown up with the industry. He started at Dunnhumby, then spent a decade at 8451, which is Kroger's data science and media company, helping build and scale Kroger Precision Marketing from the early days. Last year, he returned to Dunnhumby as SVP and Global Head of Media. Along the way, he's led strategy and product across onsite, offsite, and in-store media, helped commercialize Kroger's digital properties, in-house ad tech, modernized in-store media, and co-chaired the IAB's Retail Media Measurement Committee, helping shape the standards that many of us now operate on. He's the next guest in our lineup who's here to share lessons from actually doing it, building, scaling, and evolving retail media inside one of the most sophisticated ecosystems in the space. Thanks for joining me, Michael.
Good to be here, James. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start out, Dunnhumby is a well-known name, especially across the pond in the UK. I think in the US it's known in the industry, but I think we have a lot of people listening who maybe haven't been in retail media for 10 years or even 10 months for some people. So I'd love to kind of go back and do a little bit of the history of like where did Dunnhumby come from and about that transition to 8451.
Yeah, there's a whole long history, so I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. But Dunnhumby is part of the Tesco Group, as you know, in the UK, and has really been the founder of kind of customer loyalty data science and thinking for decades at this point. And the relationship with Kroger originally started when a few folks from Dunnhumby came over and formed a joint venture with Kroger almost 25 years ago at this point, and started working with various parts of the Kroger team on how to build out and scale a loyalty program, how to then connect that in through parts of the core retail business. If you think about category management, you think about loyalty and personalization capabilities, and eventually, Kroger actually bought out part of their interest in Dunnhumby and formed, as you mentioned earlier, 8451. That was in 2015, I think, so a little over a decade ago. And 8451 really sort of became for Kroger what Dunnhumby partly is for Tesco in the UK, right? Became a wholly owned sort of engine of customer data science, loyalty, insights, and personalization to help bring some of that customer data loyalty and then eventually sort of media capabilities to the forefront. And Dunnhumby, sort of outside of Kroger, has continued as an entity really across the globe. We obviously do a ton of work for Tesco still in the UK, but a big part of kind of my focus and my remit, as well as our broader business, is how do we help what we as Dunnhumby have done for Tesco as an example, and help other retailers across the globe scale out their capabilities in the right way, right? And monetize data and insights, stand up and build media businesses, make better price, promotion, assortment decisions using customer data science and the like. And so it's a big part of what Dunnhumby is really core and founded is sort of the core of Dunnhumby and what Dunnhumby was founded on, and really bill ourselves as being that customer science engine and helping businesses scale.
It makes a ton of sense. I think it's always funny, especially in the UK, when we're going in and we're talking to all these different retailers, it's almost universal that 100% of the people, running or second in command at these different retail media networks started at Dunnhumby. Like it's just, everywhere it's kind of like, okay, it's just a foregone conclusion that they're going to say, I started at Dunnhumby and then I went to here and then here and then here. So I think it's one of those kind of, like if you think about like Triad being like one of the other really early retail media players. Dunnhumby is kind of the other one I think of in that group. Somebody who was really ahead of like way ahead of the curve. Both on the data science side, but then also what evolved into more retail media.
Yeah, we take a lot of pride in our broad sort of alumni network of Dunnhumbians across across different retailers, tech companies, all over the place. That's fun to stay in contact with and fun to partner with, and certainly in different ways as they navigate their own organizations and challenges.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you mentioned, right, is like the date that stood out, which is like, 2015. So we're talking this is before, retail media was really a thing, but obviously it was a thing. It just didn't have the hype. It wasn't being talked about like it was today. When did kind of Kroger start? And obviously with 8451, I think you said 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
When did the media part start to come into it, like on top of the loyalty and data science and things like that?
Yeah, for Kroger in 8451, sort of really around that time. So I was one of sort of the founding members of what became the KPM business, and it was interesting in those earlier days of retail media when there just wasn't a whole lot out there. There wasn't the same hype around it now. There wasn't the same attention. It was all about building sort of the original sort of business case for what would become KPM and selling that into a very traditional 100-plus-year-old retail organization, right? Why should you care about this? And a huge part of that was running POCs, forming some initial partnerships, proving that we could do it to some extent, sort of proving in somewhat of a very scrappy way that retail data is an incredibly powerful accelerant for media and advertising, whether that happens, on a retailer's own digital properties, in their stores, or, by making ads smarter offsite with better targeting, better measurement, and sort of closing that loop in different ways. And so, yeah, it was really interesting in those sort of early days. I joined a very early team, and it was fun to sort of scale with that business and really sort of shape in the U.S. especially what would become one of the leading retail media businesses. But also Kroger does a great job of having a broad sort of network of partners across different areas and really trying to influence the industry in the right ways and push for customer first focus in a lot of ways, and that was a fun journey to be a part of.
And how did you all start it? Like, was it first, kind of in store? Was it on site? Even 2015, like obviously the website and things like that were around, maybe didn't have the scale and sophistication that they do today, or the app or things like that. Like, what was the kind of beginnings of it?
Yeah, for Kroger, it actually started with offsite media. If you can sort of believe that piece of it, with where the industry is today, and so much focus on onsite and in store. Um, but we first sort of saw some of the value of building audiences, and formed an early partnership with LiveRamp, and partnerships with some leading brands to test out capabilities and different things. And those were the earlier days, especially in grocery, of e-commerce starting to come online and start to be more of a thing, right? Certainly that accelerated in 2020 in a big way. But Kroger was an early sort of innovator in that space, and it wasn't probably until 2017, 18 that we really started to pay a lot more attention to the on-site space, which has become very clearly here in the U.S. sort of the leading investment lever, with which is the digital engagement that happens, here in the U.S. with retailers, and through apps and experiences and delivery capabilities that are here. That's certainly become much more of a focus, but it actually started with offsite media, which is interesting, and now a little bit has come in full circle in a lot of ways back to in-store media, which is not to say there wasn't in-store media at the time. There has been for decades. Just been much more analog and much more tied in with sort of core merchandising experiences that were happening, like end caps and displays and different things. And it's been fun now to see people start to rethink what that could look like in a more modern environment.
And I think it's interesting when, this is obviously with somebody like Kroger, right? They've been doing that for in-store, has been a thing for, I don't know how many decades and decades, right? Of, it's an end cap, it's a
Yeah.
sticker, it's something. How do you think that's like? What do you think that transition is going to look like for retailers? Like moving from that, there's both the internal side of merchant to media, but then also the kind of like customer experience side of it.
We could spend a few hours on this one, James. Um, well, what's been interesting is I've rejoined Dunnhumby, obviously, and gotten much closer to a lot of different global retailers, including Tesco, who we're very close with. Other parts of the world are so far ahead on the in-store media journey and the digitization of the store, and that's been a really interesting thing to get closer to and to bring some of those learnings here to the U.S. market with some of our retail clients and partners. Yeah, the journey is going to look a little bit different for everybody, and some of it just depends on internal structures and the relationship between the media and the merchandising team. Everybody's really in sort of a different spot. There's retailers like Tesco and Kroger, for example, have sort of had at different points a very standalone media business that is a little bit disconnected from merchandising, and now maybe getting a little bit closer and connected in. Other major retailers have, grown their media business out, within the merchandising or within the marketing part of the retail organization, and all of those have, pluses and minuses and different things. But how the in-store sort of transition happens is going to a little bit depend on what that structure looks like and how you create the right autonomy to let a business actually run and develop. Some of it's going to be heavily dependent, especially here in the U.S., on what is the right business model for how that works, right? There's so many just giant stores, right? If you think about Kroger's and Walmart's and Myers and all these stores, like the capital required to deploy digital screens across, a wide swath of that store is incredibly expensive. And so that's what's been really interesting to bring some of the learnings together from where we've seen the economic model work in parts of Europe to the forefront. And I've always gone back, even back to my time at Kroger, looking after part of the in-store business, as we've been able to learn from some of the successes that have happened with European retailers and the in-store sort of transition. A big part of how that happens successfully is, again, keeping the customer at the center of that decision, right? What are customers doing when they walk around the store? Are your customers engaging with your digital app as they walk around the store? And what does that experience in store then need to look like? Are there moments where they're spending a lot of dwell time, right, at the deli while their meat's getting cut, or at point of sale while they're waiting for checkout, or I don't know, different points where you can actually be useful to the customer, right? How can you inspire them in different ways? How can you create great brand moments to either get them to purchase something new or drive awareness of something, or inspire them with a recipe if it's a grocery environment, or we do a lot of work with DIY and home improvement retailers as well, as I know you all do. And so, is there some sort of, connection in with, how can I best use this tool that I'm considering? Or what are the trade-offs between these few things? How do you use media to be really useful for a customer in those touch points that just develops this, broader sort of loyalty with the retailer and a more trusted relationship with the customer in that way?
Yeah, I go back to, I feel like like in the grocery side, like the dream is that, I'm getting media delivered based on what I'm doing. Right. I think
Yeah.
we're still probably too far off from that. I know people have tried like smart carts, but then you see carts in a ditch somewhere and you're like, you don't want $1,000 cart in a ditch. But just the idea of like I pick up tortillas and something's telling me, hey, like if you want to try this new guacamole that's in the deli section, like here's 25% off,
Yeah.
or something like that, right? Like those sorts of interactions, it feels like we'll get there someday. And I know there's like been some tests and people are working on it, but it's definitely not like widely done. It's interesting what you said about Europe. Like I see the same thing. I went and toured Continente, one of our customers we work with in Portugal, and I was shocked by the like how digitized the store really was. But the other thing I also realized was like the density, like the population density also contributes to that. Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
how many people are in a store. Like you're in this store, it's like there's 20 people at checkout at any given time. The store is packed. Whereas, I think in America, we're used to this level of like convenience where, I have four Harris Teeters, Kroger's brand in North Carolina,
Yeah.
within like a 6 mile radius of me. right? It's like I can pick any one of those to go to, and none of them are ever that that busy compared to a standard European store. And so every one of those, it's how do you get power to the screens, how do you get Wi-Fi or internet to the screens, and deploy all these expensive screens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think it's going to be sometimes a little bit more of a challenge here than in Europe, but it seems like it's going to get there.
Yeah, I think it will. And, as it becomes more digitized, what's interesting and where we've worked with a lot of our clients is how do you then be smarter about not only where you put screens and different media content touch points in store, but how does that then vary between stores, right? Oftentimes you mentioned the four Harris Teeters within your 6 mile radius. It's easy to treat those the same and to say, hey, we're going to put the same content, the same screens, the same thing here. But when you actually get down and start to look at the customer data, who shops at store, how often they shop, how long they stay in the store, what times of day they're there, it might actually be very different because of traffic patterns and because of who lives around the store and because of maybe the assortment that's on the shelf in one spot versus another, or the price sensitivity of the customers in that community. Like there can be all kinds of different factors that's another thing that I think the digitization of the store brings is how do you then be smarter, just like you can in on-site or off-site media, about what ads you serve in store. Now you certainly can't be one-to-one without crossing a line on privacy, but you can make a lot of inferences from the data, the time of day, the weather, all kinds of things that can influence how you be smarter about what you show a customer when they navigate the store.
Yeah, you're absolutely right because going back to my four Harris Teeters, I mean, one of them is 6 miles north into the woods, basically, where they sell a lot of firewood
Yeah,
and other things, and then the other one is 6 miles towards in the nicest part of town, and it feels more like a Whole Foods, right? And so like just
yeah,
the same brand, same store, obviously 10 miles apart, and I think stock very different things and
yeah.
have a very different set of customers.
And that's where it can go back to the connection with the merchandising team, right? Because in that case, obviously the merchandising team at Harris Teeter has poured a lot of effort into making sure that the makeup of that store, the assortment, the price, the promotion, the layout serves that community and that client very well. How do you then do the same with media? Bring the same level of one-to-one sort of personalization at a store level.
Yeah, it's a good segue into something else I wanted to talk about, which is measurement and attribution, right? Not necessarily just
Yeah,
for in-store, but I know you were part of you co-chaired the IAB's like Retail Media Measurements Committee. There's a lot going on about, how do we think about the right way to measure retail media? So I'd love to just kind of jump into, how are you thinking about how we get to like, right, I guess maybe to rephrase it, thinking about where we came from, right? Like going all the way back 15 years ago, how
yeah.
are you measuring then versus how do you think we should be measuring now?
Yeah, it's again a great topic that we could spend hours on. What's interesting for me about the measurement, measurement gets so much attention, it gets so much focus because like ultimately that was and kind of is the promise of retail media, right? You can close the loop, you have the data. Now the data looks different everywhere, right? Some retailers have really, really scaled loyalty programs. Some are just relying on credit card transactions and other things. So it's different every place. But in reality, there is the data there to close the loop. If you roll back, 10, 15, 20 years, the focus was straight on that, right? It was focused on attribution. I want to understand, hey, customer saw ad, what did they buy? How can I do that? And over time, we've had this sort of different notion of incrementality, of lift. Is it based on holdout control or using synthetic controls? Are you using regression and ANCOVA models? Like all kinds of different things, right? There's more methodologies and different things than we could count. But I think what's interesting is there's a pretty well accepted sort of standard for what you need to provide basic attribution in near real time, as well as some version of, you know, did this customer buy more than they otherwise would have if they hadn't seen the ad, right? And that can be solved and that can be delivered through various methodologies, some of which I just referenced. But I think a huge part of it is It's really just having transparent conversations with your brand and advertising partners. I think that's what a lot of retailers sort of lose focus on is they listen to what's going on in the market, all this noise about measurement. I need to deliver iROAS in 2 weeks or in 2 days because that's what Amazon's doing or that's what Walmart's doing or whoever. And I've got to scramble all my teams to go do that. The reality is like that's great and fine for Amazon, but it isn't what has to happen everywhere. There needs to be some version of that, but it needs to be what's right for that particular retailer and the scale that they have, the investment that they're getting, and the conversation with their brand and advertiser on what they're actually looking for. Being transparent with, hey, here's where we are today. Here's what we can deliver for you. Here's what you can expect from us. Help us get better. Let's challenge each other. Just like again, back to the core sort of retail and merchandising, those merchants and those brands are having conversations about products, about price, about promotion. Sometimes it's tense and sometimes it's a negotiation, just like it's going to be here too. But a lot of times that conversation is actually lacking. People are listening more to the market or to other things than just sitting down and having a conversation on what do I actually need to deliver here to make you happy with your investment, to help you understand what your customers are doing and how you can continue to reach them better using the tools that I have available for you.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody who was fairly early on at Amazon, and they made the point that they actually found with certain brands share of category was actually resonated way more than ROAS or iROAS or
Yeah,
any sort of incrementality. Is that they were actually the brand was saying, okay, I'm currently number three in soda. If you help me move to number two, like that's how I get bonused,
yeah.
right? Like it's not based on in a given market, right? And it's not based on oh, did I spend $10,000 and get $30,000 back, right?
Right. Yeah. On any one, individual campaign, hey, I'm throwing a few sponsored products out there. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's less important than what is the brand actually looking at. And many of the brands are building their own internal attribution models and trying to connect across multiple retailers and different things too. And so that's what I feel like is just it's lost in the noise a little bit sometimes. That's what, we're trying to help our retail clients understand a little bit better and figure out, hey, for your value proposition, for what you're trying to do with your media business, what is right? And how do you have the right conversations with brands to deliver on truly what they need and to, maximize investment in your ecosystem and best serve your customers in the right ways?
Yeah, I think it's a really important distinction that, for some of us that came from some of the traditional ad tech, where for publishers it was always, I feel, very similar, right? It was just a similar playbook. Every publisher was doing it the same way. Retail is really so much, so different, right? Like going into a home improvement store is way different than going into my grocery store. I might go into one twice a week, right? I might go into my home improvement store, three times a month, but it's on the same Saturday where I'm trying to fix something, right? And I'm back for the third time in the same day. And so every pattern's different. The amount of spend, what you're spending on, how the brands think about it. I think it really it does make sense why there's so much more to figure out here in a given retailer, right? And I know that's a lot of what Dunnhumby's doing now, right? Is going out and helping a retailer figure out what is the right retail media network, what's the right configuration for that individual retailer.
Yeah, and yeah, we do a lot of consulting work for our different retail partners, whether it's, design work on trying to stand up a new retail business or, it's helping them stand up a new channel or get sort of unstuck when they hit a ceiling or, improve, so much of what we hear is sort of the operational element, right? You stand up these channels, you stand up new partners, new technology, but you sort of forget that it takes a lot of execution and a lot of hand holding to actually run a business, right? And so how do you start to automate parts of that? How do you help your people do more with less? How do you bring forward the right sort of integrations and tools? And yeah, it's a big part of, I've been back at Dunnhumby for, 8 months or so now. And a big part of, with our history and our heritage on, customer data science and the hundreds of data scientists that we have and the awesome capabilities that we've built for media businesses and retail businesses across the globe. How do we become a little bit of that intelligence layer for retail media businesses to help them tie together different parts of their business that might be disparate, that don't talk to each other, that prohibit them from actually delivering trusted measurement or gleaning insights that are going to help a brand invest better in that retail media business and drive more performant campaigns. Those are the types of things that we're really focused on, and I think it's going to take a lot of different things to sort of make that come to life. It's going to take tech partners. It's going to take it's a big part of how we work together in many ways. And yeah, it's a I think that's a bit of the next phase of retail media, right? There's standing up channels, there's standing up capabilities, there's the sort of the operational element, and then there's this sort of analytic and intelligence and insights layer, especially as you think about some of the new AI capabilities. Can't believe we've gotten this far without mentioning that yet. But that's where I think businesses, even the biggest scaled businesses today, are going to need to really invest going forward because driving that efficiency and that performance through their business is going to be really, really important to continuing to drive brand investment and continue to build on that trusted relationship.
It's a good like going back a little bit to your point around what it takes to run one of these businesses, right? And I think that, it's like it is a, you look at Kroger, you look at Tesco, you look at like lots of these big retailers, like it is a significant business to drive the revenue that they're driving, right? Walmart,
Yeah.
Amazon, anybody. We still see, I think Kroger and Tesco are probably great examples of two companies who really kind of decided to own this early on, right? And really build out internal capabilities. We still see some retailers just kind of fully outsourcing it. And maybe sometimes that's the right choice. Like, how do you think about that? When does it make sense for a retailer to really own more of this, build the business, maybe own their own tech, in-house some of their tech, things like that? Like, how do you think about that from a Dunnhumby standpoint?
Yeah, it's different for everybody. Like that's the reality. I think certain retailers, you mentioned Kroger and Tesco, and certainly there's some other big ones across the globe as well, certainly have the size and scale and expertise that they've invested in to build out an in-house, at least certain parts of their capabilities, right? Maybe not the whole business, but certain aspects of it, right? You've got teams of analysts, you've got teams of engineers, you've got certain things, and it takes a lot to do that. I know from experience, like that is a heavy lift. Um, that's not right for everybody, right? Even a mid-size, super regional here in the U.S. or others, there might be certain aspects of it that you want to own yourself, and those are the questions that we ask a lot of times, right? What do you really want to do? What do you want to stand for? What's your value proposition to the market, right? Maybe part of what you want to do is we're going to own sales, right? We want to have this close connection with our merchandising part. We want to be interfacing with brands day in and out. We are never going to sort of outsource sort of the sales and the brand connection piece of it. But some of the technology, some of the analytics, some of these things, we're going to, work to integrate that totally. And then there's some retailers where it's just going to make sense to outsource all of it, right? This is not a focus for us. We want it to still be true to our core value proposition to our customers. That's where I've really seen retailers go off the rail is like when the retail business itself has one sort of value proposition and the media business has another, and they are not compatible with each other, right? That is sort of a recipe for real challenges. And so no matter what the decision is and what's right for any individual retailer, um, it's doing so purposefully and making sure that you really sort of think through who do we want to be, what do we want our customers to sort of feel and see in this space, and how do we then leverage partners to sort of complement what we are really good at ourselves. Those are some of the questions that we sort of challenge our retail clients and partners on to help them sort of realize, not get too enamored with sort of the noise in the industry on, hey, your media business should be growing 25% year over year because that's what the industry's doing and everything else. No, let's set your ambitions right and let's figure out what you want to own, what makes sense to partner, how can we bring in the right partners to help you accelerate in the right ways, and just get to the right spot.
How do you think about I think we're creating a lot of retail media networks. I joke that like my job is to launch 1,000 walled gardens. But when you think about, you mentioned like the kind of super regionals, right? Like if you're another big Cincinnati company, right? If you're Procter and Gamble and you're looking at the market and you're like, okay, there's Amazon, Kroger, Walmart, then you start to go down the list of like, okay, you get to Giant Eagle, you get to ATB, Publix, Wegmans. Like there's a long list of retail media networks. It could probably be 20 of them in the US just to cover like grocery. Do you think like, are we creating too many of these? Are we going to see like consolidation, or like how do you think about like this problem from the brand side?
The short answer is yes, there are probably too many, at least too many for every brand to invest in, right? And you didn't even get to the broader sort of commerce media networks, right, outside of core retail. When you start to think about, fintech and, there's a student loan company I heard of that started a commerce media network, right? There's all kinds of things. Um,
Yeah.
Again, I think we're going to see consolidation. I think we're going to see some retailers start to outsource a little bit more. We've already seen some retailers, borrow, technology from other retailers and sort of jointly go in together. I think we're going to see some aggregation and some consolidation of, how retailers, especially non-competing retailers, partner together to drive. Drive just broader scale with what they can actually deliver for a brand. I have a friend who's in an agency, and he tells me all the time. He said, "Why would I go buy offsite media at scale from a smaller regional retailer when I can already buy purchase-based audiences and get measurement 2 or 3 times over nationally in the U.S., right?"
Right.
That's the reality. And so maybe there's a play for some of the regional retailers to partner together in certain aspects, or to leverage some of what their core strength around in-store media and other ways too. And so, yeah, the short answer is I think we're going to see some consolidation. I think we're going to see some retail media businesses that have been stood up actually just fold more directly into the merchandising business and become a more core part of the merchandising negotiation. Um, I think we may see some outsource a little bit more than they have in the past. It's almost like there's so many retailers in this middle now. It's like you're going to make a choice to
Yeah.
fold in, you're going to make a choice to aggregate, or you're going to make a choice to sort of outsource. And there's combinations of those things and whatever else. But there's got to be, and I think we're probably at it at this point, a tipping point for just adding things in and providing too much choice that brands and agencies just frankly don't have time or the investment and money to learn how to invest in all these networks, much less actually do the work to do it.
Yeah, well, we think about it a lot. If you like, the best position to be in is if you can be, a top three choice for a brand,
Hmm.
right? And so you think about like, you're in home improvement, like you could list the like who are the top two like really easily, right? And it's like if you're in that position for home improvement, you're gonna be like, in the top three because Amazon's probably always in that top three too, or Walmart, right? And so it's kind of like,
Yep.
can you be in that top list for a given brand? It probably makes a ton of sense to invest. When you get down into if you're the sixth or seventh, like it just feels tough, right? Like if you're a home improvement, if you're DeWalt or somebody, right? It's like between Walmart, Amazon, Home Depot, and Lowe's.
Yeah.
Like if if you're the fifth in that list, like that's a tough position.
Yeah, and there's two sides of it. If you're a DeWalt, you've got to sell your product. You got to make sure your product's visible on all these commerce sites, and increasingly the definition of a retail commerce site is even getting broadened, right? There's commerce now happening on TikTok, on ChatGPT, on obviously on Uber and DoorDash and other things too. And so it's another angle on this as well, is there's so much even further choice for where a product can be bought and sold. And so, the media is certainly going to follow that to some extent, but yeah, it's getting a little noisy out there.
Yeah. So you mentioned it. So now we get to do our AI hour.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? When how do you think about agentic commerce and people shopping through, whether it's ChatGPT or any of these kind of agents? How do you think that's going to change kind of retail media?
Yeah, I think there's it's always useful, at least in my opinion, to like take a step back and say, what do we actually mean by agentic commerce? 'Cause if people feel like people use the word and then they mean an agent fully shopping on behalf of somebody, or just doing research about a product you want to buy, or sometimes even just leveraging one of these tools as you walk around a store, for example, to understand, hey, what ingredients are in this, or where did this product come from? These types of things, especially as you think about grocery. But yeah, I think it's going to have an impact. I mean, the AI tools that we now have from a media business standpoint have tremendous potential to help with operations and execution for retail businesses. Help, I mentioned insights earlier. A huge part of what we see as a potential and what we're investing in are the AI capabilities that can sit on top of data and insights engine that help proactively show insights, right? Hey, you're losing with this cohort of customers who have now, either, switched brands or they've left the category or different things. How do you re-engage them, right? And how do you actually prompt somebody to say, these are the types of media channels that these types of customers respond to. Here's a suggested campaign for you to actually run through this retailer to drive the best performance, right? And maybe you got some ability to tweak on it, but almost automate parts of that. I think that's like a huge sort of unlock as we sort of invest in those capabilities. I think with truly sort of agentic commerce, right? Me building an agent to shop on my behalf, do my local Kroger shop or, my Home Depot shop every week, whatever that may be. Um, it's it's certainly going to have an impact on retail media businesses. To what scale and to what extent, we don't know yet because it's still a very sort of nascent capability. Certainly, the biggest threat is with on-site media here in the U.S., which is such a huge portion of the business and a huge portion of the profit that these retail media businesses drive. If research and inspiration and discovery and sometimes even the transaction itself start happening off of another property, that takes that impression, that click, that experience off of a retailer's site, out of its app, and so certainly lessens the opportunity. Um, Maybe it's a little bit different globally, but certainly that's a challenge here in the U.S. I think what's interesting though then is that makes it even more important for these retail media businesses in the US to invest in digital capabilities in store, right? Because that is
Yeah, yeah.
much more of a friend to AI, right? You might be using AI as you shop the store, you might be using it before your shopping trip, but the more that a retailer can actually diversify and invest in in-store media capabilities, like we talked about earlier, that then actually offers a competitive moat for them. Should on-site media sort of hit a ceiling or actually start to decline at some point because of some of the experience moving off of the retailer's site.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I think it's I think I look at it in a lot of ways similar to, like you mentioned earlier, like delivery, right? And I
Yeah.
think there was a world where everyone said, well, nobody's going to go to Kroger's website, right? Because they're just going to go to Instacart and order that way. But the vast majority of groceries are still bought in store. Next is probably e-commerce and then delivery, right? And so I think it's like just another channel retailers have to now start thinking about and worrying about, and how does it affect things, and where does it go?
Yeah, and it's been really interesting to see sort of which retailers have like invested in bringing those agentic AI capabilities into their native experience, and then the ones who have very purposefully and choicefully not done that. There's going to be pros and cons either way, and again, that goes back to what's right for a particular retailer, what capabilities do they want to bring forward for their customer, how do they want to, what parts of that experience do they want to own and not, and I feel like we've hit that theme a few times in a few different ways here, but that's another sort of part of it.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. So to close out, like what are you most excited about kind of over the next couple years in commerce media?
Oh gosh. I am really excited about the focus in store. We've mentioned, a lot already that, 80 to 90% of the transactions are still happening in store. It's an environment where I think the customer has to be even more at the forefront of the decisions that are made, right? I go back to how do you be useful to a customer? How do you create an experience that makes people want to shop there every week? That, for the customer who's dragging three kids around the store and you want to help them wayfind and get through faster, fantastic, right? But the customer who's doing a lot of research and considering four different tools as they, walk through the store and, wants to do a little research on that. I think that's going to be a huge focus kind of going forward. And I'm glad we're sort of at this moment where we're having this conversation now, and we need to unlock. I think what's interesting is brands and agencies especially still don't understand or pay enough attention yet to this true scale that in-store media capabilities could offer. The volume of impressions, the volume of impact could dwarf what is, on-site media today, right? Now, will it? I don't know. Will it be valued the same? I don't know. Those are all things that we sort of need to work out. And how does measurement happen and how you deliver on some of those things? But that's I've seen it work so well with our clients globally in Europe. I'm really excited for what that brings here in the U.S.
Awesome. Well, Michael, this has been great. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, James. Thanks. Appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking Retail Media. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share this show with your network. We'll be back soon with more insights to help you navigate the future of retail media. See you next time.